Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her early years were marked by instability. Her father, Leo Dale Pittman, was incarcerated and later took his own life in prison. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, abandoned Aileen and her brother Keith, leaving them with their maternal grandparents. Aileen later described experiencing mistreatment during her formative years. By her teenage years, Aileen was living on the streets. She worked as a street worker in Florida, traveling the highways. In 1986, she met Tyria Moore, and the two began a romantic relationship. Between November 1989 and November 1990, 7 men were found deceased along Florida highways. The victims were Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Seams, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, and Walter Antonio. All had been shot multiple times, and their vehicles were taken and later abandoned. The pattern suggested a single perpetrator targeting men who picked up individuals along the highways. The incidents occurred across multiple counties, creating jurisdictional challenges for investigators. The investigation gained traction when authorities discovered personal items in a pawn shop. The items led investigators to Aileen Wuornos. Witnesses described a blonde woman seen with some victims. Law enforcement approached Tyria Moore, who agreed to cooperate. In January 1991, Moore made recorded phone calls to Wuornos. During these conversations, Moore encouraged confession. Wuornos was arrested on January 9, 1991. Aileen provided a confession in which she claimed she had acted in self-defense, stating that each of the men had either attacked her or attempted to do so during encounters. However, as the investigation progressed, prosecutors argued that the primary motive was robbery rather than self-defense. The stolen vehicles and personal items suggested financial gain. The trial for Richard Mallory began in January 1992. Forensic evidence included ballistics matching the bullets found in the victims to a .22 caliber Charter Arms revolver that Wuornos had discarded, which was later recovered by divers. Testimony from Tyria Moore proved damaging. The jury returned a guilty verdict, and Wuornos received an execution sentence. Over the following months, Wuornos pleaded no contest to 5 additional cases and was convicted in all of them, receiving execution sentences for each. She did not stand trial for Peter Seams, as his body was never recovered. Throughout the legal proceedings, questions arose about her mental state and whether she had received adequate representation. Psychological evaluations revealed a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and post-traumatic stress, conditions that her defense argued influenced her actions. In interviews conducted while she was on death row, Aileen made varying statements about her motives. At times, she maintained self-defense. In other instances, she acknowledged robbery had been a factor. In her final interviews, she expressed anger toward the justice system, stating she believed she had been treated unfairly. Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, at Florida State Prison. Her last words were a cryptic message about returning on a mothership, like the movie Independence Day. Her case has since been the subject of extensive media coverage, including films, documentaries, and books that examine both the acts and the societal factors that may have contributed to her trajectory. The debate surrounding Wuornos continues. Some view her as a product of systemic failures and personal trauma, while others focus on the 7 lives taken and the families left without answers. But the next case would unfold not on highways, but within the walls meant for care. Gwendolyn Graham. Alpine Manor, a nursing home in Walker, Michigan, became the setting for events in 1987. Gwendolyn Graham worked as a nurse's aide at the facility. She began a romantic relationship with Kathy Wood, another aide. Between January and April 1987, 5 elderly women at Alpine Manor passed away under circumstances later determined as suspicious. The victims were Marguerite Chambers, Myrtle Luce, Mae Mason, Belle Burkhardt, and Edith Cook. All were vulnerable individuals with limited mobility and cognitive impairments. The method used involved placing washcloths over the faces of the victims until they stopped breathing. This technique left minimal physical evidence, and the cases were initially attributed to natural causes given the advanced years and health conditions of the residents. Graham and Wood continued their duties at the facility without suspicion falling on them during this period. The relationship between Graham and Wood deteriorated after the events at Alpine Manor. In 1988, after the two had separated and Graham had left Michigan, Wood began confiding in her ex-husband. Wood told him that Graham had targeted residents and that she herself had been aware. The ex-husband initially did not believe the story, but eventually reported it to authorities when Wood provided additional details. His report would become the catalyst for the investigation. Walker Police Department opened an investigation in December 1988. Detectives interviewed staff and reviewed medical records. Wood agreed to cooperate and provided detailed accounts. According to Wood, Graham had suggested harming residents as a way to create a bond between them. Wood claimed that Graham had planned to select victims whose initials would spell out the word murder, a macabre project they ultimately abandoned after the 5th victim. The motivation, as described by Wood, was not financial gain or revenge, but rather a disturbing form of relational bonding and the thrill of having control over life and ending it. Wood admitted to acting as a lookout during some incidents and to being present when the acts occurred. Exhumation of some of the victims was considered, but the time elapsed and the condition of the remains made definitive forensic conclusions difficult. Instead, prosecutors relied heavily on Wood's testimony, corroborating statements from other staff members who recalled unusual behavior and circumstantial evidence regarding the timing and circumstances of the passing events. Gwendolyn Graham was arrested in Texas in December 1988. She denied all allegations and maintained her innocence throughout the legal proceedings. Kathy Wood, in exchange for her cooperation and testimony against Graham, pleaded guilty to second-degree charges in 5 cases. Her plea agreement resulted in a sentence of 20 to 40 years in prison. Graham's trial took place in 1989, where the prosecution presented Wood as the star witness. Despite Graham's defense arguing that Wood had fabricated the story to deflect blame from herself, the jury found Graham guilty of 5 counts of first-degree charges and 1 count of conspiracy. She received 5 life sentences without the possibility of release. Kathy Wood served her sentence and was released from prison in January 2020, moving to South Carolina to live with her daughter after serving 29 years. Her release was met with opposition from families of the victims, who felt that her role had been minimized and that she had escaped appropriate consequences. Graham remains incarcerated and has continued to deny involvement. While one facility failed its residents, across the ocean, another medical professional was beginning a pattern that would devastate families. Lucy Letby. Between June 2015 and June 2016, the neonatal unit at Countess of Chester Hospital experienced an unusual cluster of incidents. Lucy Letby, a neonatal nurse, was on duty during many of these incidents. Hospital staff noticed a correlation between Letby's shifts and sudden deterioration of infants. 7 infants lost their lives, and 7 others experienced severe medical crises. The victims included both premature infants and those born at term. The methods alleged included injecting air into bloodstreams, overfeeding with milk, poisoning with insulin, and physical trauma. Concerns were raised by consultant pediatricians as early as 2016. Hospital management initially resisted. An internal review and police investigation were launched in 2017. Cheshire Police examined medical records, staff schedules, and conducted interviews. Handwritten notes found in Letby's home included statements about guilt, though their interpretation became contentious. Letby was arrested in July 2018 and subsequently charged. The trial lasted 10 months and became one of the longest in British legal history. The prosecution presented evidence, including medical records showing unexplained collapses during Letby's shifts and expert testimony. Defense attorneys argued the incidents could be explained by natural causes or other factors. The jury found Letby guilty of 7 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder in August 2023. A 7th count of attempted murder was added following a retrial in July 2024. She received a whole life order, meaning she would spend the remainder of her life in prison without the possibility of release. Letby maintained her innocence and refused to attend her sentencing hearing. Following the conviction, significant controversy emerged regarding the evidence used in the trial. Multiple medical experts and statisticians have questioned whether the pattern of incidents definitively points to intentional acts or could be explained by systemic issues within the hospital. An investigation by The New Yorker and statistical analyses raised concerns about the reliability of some expert testimony, particularly regarding the interpretation of medical evidence and the use of shift patterns as proof. Following the rejection of her initial appeal in 2024, Letby's legal team and a growing group of scientists have focused on the Criminal Cases Review Commission, citing concerns that the statistical shift pattern evidence was flawed. The case has prompted calls for the conviction to be reviewed by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, an independent body that investigates potential miscarriages of justice. Scientific experts have argued that the medical evidence does not conclusively support the prosecution's theory, and questions have been raised about whether confirmation bias influenced the investigation. The Letby case remains deeply divisive. Families of the victims believe justice was served, while others in the medical and scientific communities argue that the evidence does not meet the standard required for such serious convictions. No clear motive was ever established, which has added to the debate about whether the acts occurred as described or whether a vulnerable individual became the focus of a flawed investigation. From a British hospital, the investigation moves to American medical facilities, where another nurse's actions would raise similar alarms. Janine Jones. Janine Jones worked as a licensed vocational nurse in pediatric units in Texas during the 1970s and early 1980s. Her employment included Bexar County Hospital and later a pediatric clinic in Kerrville. Colleagues began noticing an alarming pattern of medical crises. Between 1977 and 1982, estimates suggest between 15 and 60 individuals may have been harmed during Jones's shifts, though exact numbers remain uncertain. The victims were typically very young. At Bexar County Hospital, staff noted emergencies clustered around Jones. Medical professionals observed Jones would often be first to notice a crisis and respond heroically, though some began to suspect the frequency was improbable. In 1982, Jones left Bexar County Hospital and took a position at a pediatric clinic run by Dr. Kathleen Holland in Caryville. Almost immediately, infants at the clinic began experiencing sudden respiratory arrests and cardiac events. One case that drew particular scrutiny was Chelsea McClellan, 15 months old, who had been brought for a routine checkup. While in Jones's care, Chelsea suffered a seizure and stopped breathing, then passed away at a hospital. Another incident involved Rolando Santos, an infant who experienced a medical emergency at the clinic while Jones was present. The individual survived, but required intensive medical intervention. Dr. Holland became increasingly suspicious after multiple incidents and eventually requested a toxicology analysis of medications in the clinic. The analysis revealed that bottles of medication had been tampered with, containing substances that could induce the symptoms observed in the affected individuals. Investigations by law enforcement revealed that Jones had been using substances such as succinylcholine, a muscle relaxant that causes paralysis and respiratory failure, and digoxin, a heart medication that can be lethal in high doses. These substances were difficult to detect in routine toxicology screens at the time, which contributed to the delay in identifying Jones as the source of the medical crises. The lack of detection allowed her to continue unimpeded for years. Jones was arrested and charged in connection with the cases of Chelsea McClellan and Rolando Santos. During the legal proceedings, prosecutors argued that Jones suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological condition in which a caregiver induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention and appear heroic. Testimony from colleagues and medical experts supported the theory that Jones craved the recognition and praise that came from responding to emergencies she had created. In 1984, Jones was convicted in the case involving Chelsea McClellan and received a sentence of 99 years. She was also convicted in the case involving Rolando Santos and received an additional 60 years. However, due to a 1977 mandatory release law designed to manage prison overcrowding, Jones was legally required to be released in March 2018, regardless of her 99-year sentence. Public outrage over her potential release led prosecutors to file additional charges. In 2017, Jones was indicted on 5 new charges related to incidents at Bexar County Hospital. Jones made statements to investigators in which she acknowledged responsibility, saying that she had indeed harmed infants. Her confessions provided authorities with grounds to keep her incarcerated. A mental health evaluation ordered by the court examined whether Jones was competent to stand trial on the new charges. In January 2020, Jones pleaded guilty to the 1981 murder of Joshua Sawyer as part of a plea deal and received a life sentence, ensuring she would never be released under the previous mandatory laws. She remains in prison, and the full extent of her actions may never be known, given the number of unexplained cases during her years in medical facilities. But while some sought recognition, others operated with motives rooted in greed. Dana Sue Gray. Dana Sue Gray was born in 1957 in California. She worked as a nurse's aide, providing in-home assistance to elderly individuals. By 1994, Gray faced financial difficulties and accumulated debts. In late February and early March of 1994, 3 elderly women were attacked in their homes. The victims were Norma Davis, 87 years old, June Roberts, 66, and Dorinda Hawkins, 81. All 3 women lived alone and were vulnerable due to their advanced years. Norma Davis was found deceased in her home on February 28th 1994. While Gray was a trained nurse, she was not Davis's employee, but rather the daughter of a close friend, which gave her the trust needed to enter the home. 2 days later, on March 1st, June Roberts was attacked and killed instantly. It was actually the third victim, Dorinda Hawkins, who survived her encounter on March 9th and provided the crucial physical description of the tall, well-dressed woman to investigators. On March 9th, Dorinda Hawkins was found in her home, also in Canyon Lake. She had been attacked in a manner similar to the other victims. Once again, financial items including credit cards were missing. The pattern was becoming clear. Elderly women living alone were being targeted by someone who had access to their homes and knew they were vulnerable. Investigators noticed the similarities immediately. Investigators tracked the use of stolen credit cards from all three victims. The cards had been used at various stores in the Riverside area to purchase clothing, cosmetics, and other items. Surveillance footage from these stores showed a woman matching Gray's description making the purchases. When authorities reviewed employment records for caregivers who had access to the victims, Gray's name appeared in connection with at least 2 of the women. Gray was arrested on March 16, 1994, after police tracked her to a local department store where she was attempting to use a victim's credit card. During questioning, she initially denied involvement, but eventually provided statements that implicated herself. She admitted to being present during the incidents and to taking items from the victims' homes. Physical evidence, including the stolen credit cards found in her possession and forensic analysis linking her to the crime scenes, supported the charges against her. In 1998, Gray entered a guilty plea to avoid a potential execution sentence. She was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree charges and received life imprisonment without the possibility of release. The plea agreement spared her from facing a jury trial where the prosecution would have sought the most severe penalty available under California law. Gray has remained incarcerated at the California Institution for Women. In recent years, there have been discussions about sentencing reforms and whether individuals serving life sentences for financial motives should be reconsidered, though Gray's case has not resulted in any changes to her status. While Gray's crimes were driven by financial desperation, the next case takes us to a different era and continent, where greed took an even darker form. Raya and Sakina. In the early 20th century, Alexandria, Egypt was a bustling port city. Raya and Sakina operated a brothel in the Laban neighborhood. The sisters, along with their husbands and accomplices, became involved in events that would make them infamous. Between December 1919 and November 1920, 17 women disappeared in Alexandria. The victims were primarily individuals working independently, and they were seen as competition to the sisters' establishment. The economic difficulties following World War I had reduced business at their brothel, creating financial pressures. The method involved luring women to properties controlled by the group. Once inside, the victims were given wine to consume until they were in a vulnerable state. They were then suffocated using wet cloths pressed over their faces. After taking jewelry and any money the victims had, the bodies were buried beneath floor tiles in properties located at locations such as No. 5 Macoris Street and No. 8 El Naga Lane. Holes would be dug, the remains placed inside, and the tiles reset to conceal the evidence. The operation unraveled in November 1920 when a plumber working on one of the properties discovered human remains beneath the floor. The discovery prompted an immediate investigation by Egyptian authorities. Police excavated the properties and found multiple bodies buried in similar fashion. The remains were in various stages of decomposition, indicating that the burials had occurred over an extended period. Raya, Sakina, their husbands, and the two accomplices were arrested and charged. During interrogations, members of the group provided accounts of their roles in the events. The trial took place amid significant public attention, as the case involved not only the number of victims, but also the calculated nature of the acts. The prosecution presented evidence including the physical remains, testimonies from neighbors who recalled suspicious activity, and statements from the accused themselves. All 6 individuals were convicted. Raya and Sakina were sentenced to death and executed on consecutive days. Raya was hanged on December 21st, and Sakina was hanged on December 22nd, 1921. They became the first women to be executed in Egypt during the modern era, a fact that contributed to the notoriety of the case. Their husbands and accomplices were also executed. In more recent years, scholars have re-examined the case and raised questions about the extent of Raya and Sakina's direct involvement. Researcher Salah Issa has suggested that while the sisters were central to the operation, their depiction as the sole masterminds was likely a product of the colonial-era press looking for a sensationalist, female villain narrative during a time of intense Egyptian nationalism. According to this analysis, the men in the group were the driving force behind the acts, and the sisters' roles were exaggerated by media coverage and societal biases. The case occurred during a period of colonial tension and social upheaval in Egypt, and sensationalist journalism may have amplified certain aspects to create a more dramatic narrative. The case of Raya and Sakina has endured in Egyptian popular culture, referenced in films, books, and folklore. Whether they were truly the architects of the scheme or victims of circumstances and coercion remains a subject of historical debate. The bodies buried beneath those floors in Alexandria bore witness to acts driven by desperation, greed, or perhaps something more complex than the official account suggested. The sisters' execution marked a significant moment in Egyptian legal history. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From the streets of Alexandria, the trail leads to shadows even darker across Europe and beyond. Vera Renci. The story of Vera Renci remains one of the most disputed cases in criminal history. According to accounts that emerged in the 1920s, most of which were sensationalized tabloids, Renci was born in Bucharest, though no birth or census records for her have ever been found. The narrative that has persisted describes a woman who allegedly ended the lives of 35 men, including 2 husbands, numerous lovers, and even her own son, using arsenic poison over a period spanning the 1920s. The tale begins with her first marriage to a man named Karl Schick. According to the legend, Renci became convinced that Schick was unfaithful to her. She reportedly poisoned his wine with arsenic and later told inquiring parties that he had been involved in a car accident. After Schick's disappearance, Renci allegedly remarried and repeated the pattern when she suspected her second husband of infidelity. The story claims that Renci continued to poison men she became involved with romantically. Each time she believed a lover was straying or showing interest in another woman, she would lace their drinks with arsenic. According to the narrative, she kept the bodies in zinc coffins stored in her cellar at a property in Berkerakul, a misspelled reference to what is now Zrenjanin, Serbia. The number of coffins allegedly reached 35. The discovery supposedly came when the wife of one of Renci's lovers became suspicious about her husband's disappearance. and prompted authorities to search Renzi's property. Police allegedly found the cellar filled with zinc coffins, each containing remains. When confronted, Renzi reportedly confessed to the acts, explaining that jealousy had driven her to eliminate men who she believed had betrayed her. The story states that Renzi was tried and convicted, receiving a life sentence. Yugoslavia at the time did not execute women, so she was spared that fate. She allegedly died in prison in 1960, having served decades for her crimes. However, this entire narrative faces significant scrutiny. In 1972, the Guinness Book of World Records removed any reference to Vera Renzi, citing absence of verifiable records. Researchers found no contemporary newspaper accounts, no court documents, no prison records, and no death certificate. The earliest references appear to be unsubstantiated articles from 1925. Historians who have investigated the case believe it to be largely, if not entirely, fictional. The story contains elements common to folklore and urban legends. The jealous woman, the cellar of horrors, the dramatic confession. No physical evidence has ever been produced. No victims have been identified by name with verifiable identities, and no legal proceedings can be documented. The tale may have originated from sensationalist journalism of the early 20th century, when newspapers often published lurid stories with minimal fact-checking. The story makes compelling reading, but the complete absence of documentary evidence suggests it was fabricated. If Vera Renzi existed at all, the actual facts of her life remain unknown. The story that has endured is almost certainly a legend rather than history. It serves as an example of how sensational stories can persist and be repeated as fact, despite having no foundation in verifiable evidence. The case demonstrates the importance of distinguishing between folklore and documented criminal history, especially when making claims about historical figures and events. While legends flourished in Europe, across the world in India, a very real and documented case was quietly unfolding within a family. Jolly Joseph. The village of Kudathai in Kerala, India, became the center of a case that would shock the nation when it was finally uncovered in 2019. Jolly Joseph, a woman who presented herself as a college professor, was arrested in October 2019 for poisoning 6 members of her extended family over a 14-year period from 2002 to 2016. The first victim was Anama Thomas, Jolly's mother-in-law, who passed away in 2002. Anama had consumed mutton soup that Jolly had prepared, and she died shortly afterward. At the time, her passing was attributed to a heart attack, and no autopsy was performed. The family had no reason to suspect anything sinister. 6 years later, in 2008, Tom Thomas, Jolly's father-in-law, also passed away under sudden circumstances. Again, the family accepted it as a natural occurrence given his age. In 2011, Jolly's husband Roy Thomas died unexpectedly. The pattern was forming, but the family remained unaware. The case took a particularly disturbing turn when Jolly targeted her husband's uncle, Matthew Manjayadil, in 2014. In 2014, Jolly poisoned 2-year-old Alphine, the daughter of her husband's cousin Shaju. 2 years later, in 2016, she poisoned Silly, Shaju's wife, so that she could marry Shaju herself. The passing of 3 members of the same household within a short period finally raised suspicions within the extended family. It was Rojo Thomas, Roy's brother living in the U.S., who became suspicious after noticing discrepancies in Tom Thomas's will. His persistence led to the exhumations of all 6 bodies in October 2019. Exhumations were ordered for the bodies, and forensic analysis revealed the presence of cyanide in the remains. The discovery confirmed that these were not natural passings, but deliberate poisonings. The investigation revealed that Jolly had obtained cyanide through two accomplices: M.S. Matthew, a goldsmith who had access to the chemical for his work, and Praji Kumar, who helped facilitate the procurement. Jolly would mix the cyanide into food or drinks that she served to her victims, ensuring they consumed lethal doses. The motives appeared to be complex and intertwined. Property inheritance played a significant role, as the passings allowed Jolly to control or benefit from family assets. Additionally, Jolly had been living a fabricated life, pretending to work as a college professor when she had never held such a position. She had been forging documents and maintaining elaborate deceptions about her professional life. When Roy Thomas died, Jolly began a relationship with another man, and the elimination of family members who might question her stories or threaten her control of property became part of her pattern. The passing of Matthew's family appeared to be motivated by disputes over property and attempts to silence those who were becoming suspicious. Jolly Joseph was arrested in October 2019, along with her two accomplices. She was charged with multiple counts of homicide and forgery. During interrogation, she provided statements acknowledging her involvement in the poisonings. While the full details are sealed, the investigation revealed that Jolly exhibited traits of a sociopath, maintaining a double life as a fake NIT professor, while systematically eliminating those she viewed as obstacles to her social and financial standing. The trial is ongoing in Kozhikode, Kerala. The case has drawn significant media attention in India due to the calculated nature of the poisonings over such an extended period and the fact that Jolly maintained a facade of normalcy while systematically eliminating family members. The community in Kuodathai was shocked to discover that someone they knew as a respectable professional had been responsible for so many passings within a single family. But India was not alone in harboring such calculated acts, as Canada would soon discover within its own care facilities. Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Elizabeth Wetlaufer worked as a registered nurse in long-term care facilities across Ontario, Canada. Between 2007 and 2016, she administered lethal doses of insulin to residents under her care, ending 8 lives and attempting to do so with 6 others. The victims ranged from 75 to 96 years old and included James Silcox, Maureen Pickering, Gladys Millard, Helen Matheson, Mary Zurowinski, Helen Young, Arpad Horvath, and Beverly Bertram. All were elderly residents of nursing homes where Wetlaufer worked, facilities that included Carissant Care in Woodstock, Meadow Park in London, and Telfer Place in Paris, Ontario. Wetlaufer's method involved injecting residents with insulin when they were not diabetic, or giving diabetic residents doses far exceeding their prescribed amounts. Insulin overdoses cause blood sugar levels to drop dangerously low, leading to confusion, loss of consciousness, and eventually cardiac arrest if untreated. In elderly residents with existing health conditions, such events were often attributed to natural decline, making detection nearly impossible. Wetlaufer later described experiencing what she called surges, moments when she felt compelled to harm residents. She attributed these urges to voices she heard, which she sometimes characterized as divine or demonic in nature. Her personal history included struggles with substance use and periods of depression, factors that contributed to her eventual termination from positions, though not before she had harmed numerous individuals in multiple care facilities. In 2016, Wetlaufer voluntarily admitted herself to a mental health facility in Toronto. During her stay, she confessed to staff members what she had done over the previous 9 years. The facility staff reported her statements to authorities, triggering a police investigation. Without this confession, it is likely that Vettlaufer's actions would never have been discovered, as the passings had been accepted as natural occurrences in elderly care settings. Vettlaufer was arrested and charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. In June 2017, she pleaded guilty to all charges. During her court appearance, she made a statement expressing remorse, saying she was extremely sorry for what she had done. The court sentenced Vettlaufer to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 25 years. However, due to the nature of the whole life context of her crimes, it is expected she will never be released. An inquiry was launched following her conviction to examine how she was able to operate undetected across multiple facilities. The inquiry revealed significant failures in oversight, medication tracking, and communication between care facilities. The inquiry found that Vettlaufer would likely never have been caught without her own confession. Insulin is naturally present in the body and breaks down quickly after administration, making it difficult to detect in routine post-mortem examinations. The elderly victim's existing health conditions provided ready explanations for their sudden declines. No facility where Vettlaufer worked had identified her as a risk despite her documented history of substance use and job terminations. The case led to calls for reform in how long-term care facilities monitor medication administration, track unusual patterns of resident passings, and conduct background checks on nursing staff. Families of the victims expressed anger that someone with Vettlaufer's history had been allowed to continue working in care settings without proper oversight. While Canada grappled with its nursing home scandal decades earlier in America, another pattern of family passings was unfolding. Nanny Doss. Nanny Doss, born Nancy Hazel in 1895 in Alabama, became known as the Giggling Granny due to her demeanor during police interviews. Between 1927 and 1954, she poisoned 11 members of her family using arsenic. Her verified victims included 4 husbands, her mother, her sister, her mother-in-law, and 1 grandson, Robert Lee Haynes. Though she remained a primary suspect in the earlier deaths of 2 of her daughters and another grandson. The motivation appeared to be a combination of insurance money and dissatisfaction with her marriages. Doss had a romantic view of relationships influenced by magazine stories and found her real-life experiences disappointing. Her first husband, Charlie Braggs, whom she married in 1921, survived their marriage, but 2 of their offspring did not. Both passed away under suspicious circumstances while young. Braggs eventually left Doss, taking their eldest daughter with him after he became fearful of her. Her second husband, Frank Harrelson, whom she married in 1929, passed away in 1945 after consuming food Doss had prepared. The official cause was listed as heart failure, and no investigation was conducted. Around the same time, her sister also passed away after a visit to Doss's home. Doss married Arlie Lanning in 1947, and he passed away in 1952 of what was determined to be heart failure. That same year, her mother came to live with her and passed away within months. Her mother-in-law also passed away shortly after. The pattern was clear to anyone looking closely, but no one was investigating. In 1953, Doss married Samuel Doss. Samuel was controlling and did not allow Nanny to read her beloved romance magazines or watch television programs she enjoyed. The marriage was unhappy. In October 1954, Samuel became ill after consuming stewed prunes that Nanny had laced with a massive dose of arsenic. He was hospitalized and appeared to be recovering. However, when Samuel returned home and Nanny brought him coffee, he suffered a relapse and passed away. This time, the attending physician was suspicious, given the pattern of Samuel's illness. He requested an autopsy, and the medical examiner found a large quantity of arsenic in Samuel's system. Doss was arrested in 1954 and charged with Samuel's passing. During questioning, she confessed not only to his case, but to the others spanning back nearly 3 decades. Throughout the interviews, Doss laughed and giggled, displaying a bizarre cheerfulness while discussing the poisonings. Her demeanor earned her the nickname by which she became known. When asked about her motivations, Doss explained that she had been searching for the perfect romance she read about in magazines. When her husbands disappointed her or stood in the way of what she wanted, she eliminated them. The insurance money was useful, but she claimed romantic dissatisfaction was her primary motivation. Doss was tried only for Samuel's case to avoid the complications of pursuing charges across multiple jurisdictions. She pleaded guilty and received a life sentence. While Oklahoma law permitted the execution of women, the judge sentenced her to life imprisonment instead of death because he was reluctant to send a woman to the electric chair. Nanny Doss died in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary Hospital of leukemia in June 1965, after serving 10 years of her life sentence. Her case became one of the most publicized of its era due to her giggling demeanor and the span of years over which she operated. The fact that so many passings went uninvestigated for so long highlighted how difficult it was to detect poisoning, especially when victims were already in poor health or their passings could be attributed to natural causes. While Doss targeted family members, another woman in California was preying on a different vulnerable population. Dorothea Puente. Dorothea Puente operated a boarding house at 1511 F Street in Sacramento, California during the 1980s. She catered to elderly and mentally disabled tenants who received government assistance checks. What her tenants did not know was that Puente was cashing their checks and burying their bodies in her yard. Puente was born Dorothea Helen Gray in 1929 in California. Her early life was marked by instability, including time in orphanages after her parents passed away. She married multiple times and had a history of financial fraud and forgery before she began operating her boarding house. By the 1980s, Puente had established herself as a landlady who welcomed vulnerable individuals. She presented herself as a kind and caring person who helped those society overlooked. Social workers referred clients to her boarding house, believing they would receive proper care. Tenants would move in, and Puente would have them sign over their benefit checks to her for room and board. In November 1988, social worker Judy Moyes became concerned when she could not locate one of her clients, Alvaro Montoya, who was living at Puente's boarding house. Moise contacted police, and when officers came to investigate, they noticed disturbed soil in the yard. With permission to search, they began excavating. Over the following days, police unearthed 7 bodies from Puente's yard. The remains were in various states of decomposition, wrapped in materials and buried in makeshift graves. The victims were identified as elderly or disabled individuals who had been tenants at the boarding house. Forensic examination revealed that most had been poisoned with overdoses of prescription medications mixed with alcohol. During the initial excavation of her yard, police allowed Puente to walk away from the property after she told them she was going to buy a cup of coffee at a nearby hotel. She used this opportunity to flee to Los Angeles. where she remained at large for 5 days. A massive search ensued, and she was eventually located several days later at a motel in Los Angeles, having been recognized by someone who had seen her picture on television. Puente was charged with 9 counts of first-degree homicide, though 2 of the victims' bodies were found elsewhere and their connection to Puente was less clear. The prosecution argued that Puente had poisoned tenants to continue collecting their government checks after they had passed. She would forge signatures on the checks, cash them, and dispose of the bodies in her yard to avoid detection. The trial took place in 1993 and was moved to Monterrey due to extensive publicity in Sacramento. Puente maintained her innocence, claiming that the tenants had died of natural causes and that she had panicked and buried them rather than reporting their passings. Her defense portrayed her as a caring woman who had simply made bad decisions when faced with unexpected situations. The jury found Puente guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree counts and 15 years to life for the second-degree count. The jury declined to recommend an execution sentence. Puente was incarcerated at Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, where she became known for her cooking skills and friendly demeanor among other inmates. She died of natural causes in 2011 at age 82. The case has been the subject of numerous documentaries and dramatic productions. The boarding house at 1511 F Street has since been sold multiple times and remains a source of morbid fascination in Sacramento. But not all stories of female offenders stand up to scrutiny, as the final case demonstrates. Lavinia Fisher. Lavinia Fisher is often cited as America's first female serial killer, but this designation is almost entirely mythological. The actual historical record shows that Fisher and her husband John were executed in Charleston, South Carolina on February 18, 1820, for highway robbery, not for a series of killings. The Fishers operated the 6 Mile Wayfarer House, an inn located 6 miles outside Charleston. The legend claims that they would drug guests' tea, causing them to fall into a deep sleep, and then drop them through a trap door into a basement where they would be robbed and ended. The story adds that victims' bodies were disposed of in ways that prevented discovery. The actual historical events are far less sensational. The Fishers were members of a gang that robbed travelers along the road near Charleston. In February 1819, the investigation was triggered after a man named David Ross was brutally attacked and robbed by the gang, while a man named John Peoples, or Peoples, did later testify about a suspicious encounter at the inn. Ross was the primary victim who led police to the Fishers. When police raided the 6 Mile Wayfarer House, they found evidence of stolen goods, but no bodies or trapdoors. The Fishers and several gang members were arrested and charged with highway robbery. At the time, highway robbery was a capital offense in South Carolina. The trial focused on the robbery charges, and there is no historical record of any cases being mentioned in court proceedings. John Fisher was convicted and sentenced to execution by hanging. Lavinia Fisher's trial was more complicated because, as a married woman, she had limited legal standing under the laws of the time. She was ultimately convicted as an accessory to highway robbery and also sentenced to hang. On the day of execution, February 18, 1820, both Fishers were hanged at the Old City Jail in Charleston. While legend claims she wore her wedding dress to the gallows, contemporary accounts from 1820 suggest she wore plain white clothing or a simple dress provided by the jail. The wedding dress detail was a later addition by tour guides to embellish the story. Her reported last words, in which she cursed Charleston, have become part of a local folklore, though their authenticity is questionable. The legend of Lavinia Fisher as a serial killer appears to have developed gradually over the decades following her execution. Charleston tour guides and folklore enthusiasts embellish the story, adding elements like poisoned tea, trap doors, and numerous victims. No contemporary accounts from 1820 mention anything beyond highway robbery. Historians who have examined the original court records and newspapers from the period have found no evidence supporting the narrative claims. While Lavinia Fisher is often falsely labeled as America's first female serial killer, that historical distinction is more accurately held by Jane Toppin, who confessed to 31 murders in 1901, or Lydia Sherman, who was convicted of poisoning 8 family members in 1872. She was a highway robber who faced execution for that offense, nothing more. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.